Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. We're going to do this panel in two parts. I think the grid is very unfamiliar to people, and we all kind of had presentations on the grid, and they thought, that all sounds the same, right? But really, there's actually a really nice connection between amongst our work, so this will work out. My name is Bridget Williams. I am a policy associate with the Energy Systems team at Great Plains Institute. And a big part of my work is supporting the MISO Cities and Communities Coalition. And we'll get into a little bit about what we do. My background is my education is in city planning. I then went to do a lot of organizing work, set community climate action goals in my city of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And have now come here learning how grid issues really impact the ability to achieve those goals. And I'll let my two panelists introduce themselves as well.
Hello, Jeremy Karen. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager for the City of Des Moines. Team of two, and working on a lot of ambitious targets that we're trying to meet that the city has set, and we'll get into some of that later. But my background, I grew up actually in a family of utility managers for a power company in Maine. My father actually represented that power company to the regional grid operator in New England. So I've been kind of listening to conversations about these topics for decades in my family. And career-wise, I have leaned heavily into the energy services side of public positions and working for state governments and now the city of Des Moines. So really see this opportunity to enhance the utility transmission and generation system to benefit all of our clean energy. I will over to Mo.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mo McReynolds. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a project manager in the Office of Sustainability for the City of Indianapolis. It's a pretty cool background you have. This is in your blood, Jeremy. I didn't know that. Thanks for sharing that. I don't have nearly the pedigree there, but in terms of the City of Indianapolis's energy goals, we have chosen to associate and be involved with the group we're going to talk about. And that's really driving one of the directions that we're trying to take policy and reaching carbon neutrality within the city's sustainability goals.
So there is a lot that a city can do just on their own. They can increase the density of their neighborhoods. They can improve housing affordability. They can lower vehicle. They can lower car use by offering transit options, pedestrian options, cyclist options. But electricity is very different. Communities are doing really critical work to build rooftop solar, to develop energy efficiency programs. But in order to truly decarbonize our community's building sector and transportation sector, unlike those other things I mentioned, we really do depend on other communities to do the same. And we really depend on this larger system to change, not just within our own community boundaries. And the reason that that is, or the way that how you can understand that is first you have to know how the grid works. So the grid is in 4 parts. You have your generators, that's your solar panels, wind turbines, gas plants, and they are connected to high voltage transmission lines. You've probably seen them out in rural America, side the highways. They are massive, but somehow we miss them all the time. But so those lines carry electricity from the generators to lower voltage distribution lines, which carry electricity to the end user, to your toaster, your house, your EV. And that image I just showed earlier, the grid is of course not as simple as that one image. It is this large interconnected system that really spans beyond their community, beyond the state, across a region. And so those transmission lines connect all of these generators together. And in over 2/3 of the United States, utilities and power producers are part of regional entities called regional transmission organizations. If you can go back. So these are multi-state regions through which utilities and power producers share generation resources. So even though you pay your utility bill to your local utility, you're truly being fueled by a region, not just your local utility. And here in portions of the Midwest and portions of the South, our regional transmission organization is MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. Don't let the acronym scare you in this work. There are a lot of them. But so MISO, they do a lot of different things. They operate the grid second to second. So they are making sure at all times that energy supply always meets energy demand. And they're doing this across our entire region right now. They also maintain resource adequacy, which we'll get into here in just a minute. They oversee energy markets, which is where utilities and power producers, they trade and sell their excess power. And they plan transmission projects, which Wendy will get into a little bit in her presentation. And they review generator interconnection requests. All of these things play a role in our ability to achieve our clean energy goals. So one major thing that MISO does, which is maintain resource adequacy, has a huge impact on our ability to achieve clean energy goals. Resource adequacy is conducted by MISO and by utilities, and it is essentially making sure that there is enough energy supply to meet demand. So earlier I mentioned that MISO is always making sure supply meets demand second to second, but they also look a year out and they make sure that we have enough gas plants, wind turbines on the system to meet any variations in weather, planned outages, anything that would kind of get us to our peak demand. So think someday in the summer when the sun is really, or everybody's air conditioners are on, maybe there's some planned outages on the system, so some power plants are down. They want to make sure that they have all of the capacity they need. And the reason that this matters for clean energy goals is because first, how resources are valued in that process determines what gets retired and what gets built. So a lot of communities may be working with their utilities in integrated resource plans or in trying to get them to change their resource fleet. And you might hear, well, we can only do so much because of MISO or because of reliability needs. And that is true. So how resources are valued at MISO is basically, it's not just your utility, say Excel, has to have a certain amount of megawatts available. Because each type of resource is valued differently. So for example, a gas plant might be valued at 100% capacity because they are viewed to be able to be on at all times. They're always reliable. Where solar might get a lower value because they're variable, that they don't see them as contributing the same to resource adequacy. And that results in very real resource decisions by the utility. So an example of this is in my community of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We Energies just recently announced that they're building a natural gas peaker plant and that they cited MISO's changing resource adequacy rules. Meanwhile, We Energies is closing a coal plant. So and I want to I don't want to ignore the fact that gas plants do offer reliability needs. Additional technologies and programs are needed to supplement the variability of wind and solar.
So this could be firm resources, which could be nuclear, geothermal, hydro, gas plants with carbon capture. We need storage, and we really need long duration storage. We need transmission and demand management, which are the things that energy efficiency, moving load, meaning demand, moving demand so that it's kind of uniform throughout the day rather than really high during the day and really low at night. And how resources are valued also determines what is incentivized. So Excel, for example, in the state of Minnesota, they are really moving to have a fully clean energy resource fleet because of Minnesota's state goals. So they can still do that, but they will have to potentially buy more capacity than somebody like We Energies that is not beholden to any clean energy goals, and they can get paid for those gas plants or whatever is valued really high. And there's a lot of things that MISO does that are relevant to clean energy goals, but we'll get more into that through the panel discussion. The other thing I just wanted to mention are the interconnection queues, which is the line of projects that are waiting to be connected to the grid. So every time a resource, say a solar plant, solar plant wants to be connected to the grid, it has to be studied because the grid is very sensitive. If we didn't do that, there could be blackouts. You have to make sure that there's not too many constraints on the system, that those transmission lines can carry that electricity to your home. And so each project has to be studied. This is relevant to clean energy goals because across the United States, there are 2,000 gigawatts of active capacity in the connection queue waiting to be approved. And that is more than all of the capacity that is on the system right now. And most of what is waiting in the queue is carbon-free energy. Queue reform and increased transmission capacity can allow more renewables to come online. An example of this is actually MISO has been planning transmission projects that are looking at a decarbonized future. And they've implemented some queue reform to speed up the process. I just want to mention there might be an elephant of the room of distributed energy resources. Because you put that right on your rooftop, right? So that doesn't require transmission. You can do that right on your home. And distributed energy resources will be very important, not just to powering your home, but to the grid as a whole. Either one, to reduce energy demand. So we build less, and we build less. Second, they could actually feed generation into the grid. You all have, for some states, I'm not sure how many people have net metering here, so I don't want it to be a sore subject if any states have lost that, but
We don't have an RFP.
that's right. So, and some states don't have integrated resource planning, which if there are questions about that, we can talk about. But distributed energy resources also could actually add capacity to the grid, which even through net metering, we haven't even scratched the surface of what could be done with distributed energy resources. There are conversations happening at MISO and at the federal regulatory body, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, about distributed energy resources directly participating in MISO's energy market, which would be a really big deal. It wouldn't just be, your solar going through the distribution lines. It would be being a part of the grid as a whole. But even with distributed energy resources, we are going to need this diverse mix of things. We are going to need transmission lines that can connect us to solar in California when it's not shining so bright here, so that the wind in Iowa can be connected to other parts of the country. That's going to also be very important for supplementing wind and solar. We're gonna need utility scale, we're gonna need storage. Distributed energy is really important, but it's both, it's everything. Okay. And so the work that we do in the MISO Cities and Communities Coalition is we engage with these issues. So we're a coalition of local governments across the Midwest and South, all across the MISO region. And we have diverse energy goals. A lot of us do have clean energy goals, but there's also resilience goals. We have somebody who he represents 18 counties, and they're not very concerned with clean energy goals at all, but they do have wind on their land. And so they're very concerned with getting production tax credit money. And the way that you get that money is that those wind turbines have to be running and they have to get paid in the MISO markets, and get paid for resource adequacy. And so our work is sort of twofold. We first advocate for our interests in MISO stakeholder feedback processes. And we also hopefully soon will be engaging at FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They're very important because they can set rules that will not only influence what our RTO MISO does, but what RTOs across the country do. And they regulate MISO, so they have to get everything approved through FERC. And if we think maybe MISO, didn't listen to the comments or isn't doing what we think is right, then we can make a comment to FERC. And the second thing that we do is we deepen all of our understandings of grid issues so that our members can better engage with their utility, so that our members can think about how these issues can be included in their clean energy or in their climate action plans, and really just come up with new ways to think about this work. Recently, Jeremy brought up, could we invest in transmission projects? Could communities directly invest in transmission projects? So we're exploring that. It's a way for all of us to not only advocate for our interests, but keep thinking about kind of what our roles should be and how far this work can go. So we're going to get into just a discussion between all three of us. Wendy will present, and then we'll all do a Q&A all together. So my first question is, what is a critical goal or objective that your community has, and what are the major barriers to achieving it?
Yeah, so our emissions targets for the city of Des Moines are similar to what a lot of communities are adopting. We have 45% reduction in emissions by 2030, net zero by 2050. The unique goal that we've adopted is 24/7 carbon-free electricity 2035 target. And that is a newer movement, initially kind of started by Google and a lot of the larger tech companies and Iron Mountain and some European stakeholders as well. And so that goal means that by 2035, every hour of energy that is supplied to our community citywide needs to be supplied by clean energy resources. We need to be able to account for that, making sure that we're matching that clean energy supply to the community. That system, we can do that. So rapidly decarbonizing the grid is a critical piece of that. The best way we can achieve that goal is at scale, by ensuring that the energy that's supplied to our community is coming from predominantly clean energy resources. That means we don't need as much distributed energy resources in the community. That said, we're not going to abandon that. We realize that that's a critical piece for people's personal energy resilience in their own homes, with their own businesses. And we want to support those jobs that distributed energy resources present. So that's a critical component. And that 24/7 clean energy goal kind of drives all of our how we're engaging at the state level, at the regional level, with utilities, with myself. In Iowa, we do not have integrated resource planning. So we don't really have a way to effectively weigh in on the makeup of generation resources that our utilities are utilizing in Iowa. And we are able to participate in some docket processes at our utilities board and things like that. So, topics, but we see engaging at the regional level with MISO as giving us a foothold and being able to influence regional planning that can then trickle down to utilities in each of the states. So that's a critically piece. There's a lot of opportunities to engage with MISO right now. Cities and communities don't really have much of a voice in the process, and a lot of us have more stringent goals than the utilities, and they are the loudest voices there right now. And so it's really important that we bring some equity to the planning process and make sure that our voices are heard, represented at the table. The MISO Cities and Communities Coalition has been instrumental in.
Well, good morning again to those who have joined us since we made our own introductions. This is my friend Jeremy, he's from Iowa. I'm Mo, I'm here from Indianapolis. If your brain is being broken right now, if these are brand new topics to you, if you have heard terms and acronyms that you have never been exposed to, thank you for coming here with just an amount of curiosity to learn these things and to be exposed to these things. I hope through our work in this session and what we're sharing with you, we're able to break down some of that. If you've only ever seen driving on the highway through most of the Midwest, these large things passing over you, maybe that's electricity. I don't know what that is. Maybe you have some connection now more, or you understand a little bit more about that. So again, thank you for coming here with just an amount of curiosity. To echo Jeremy, Indianapolis is very similar. We have a carbon neutrality goal within the city's sustainability and resilience plan that's called Thrive Indianapolis. If you'd like to look it up, we're very proud of it. There are two overarching goals, one of which is carbon neutrality by 2050, and one of which is incorporating equity and resilience into all of our work. So I think those two things are encompassed in this, in that we cannot achieve carbon neutrality without working within our transmissions and our renewable energy resources and working with our utilities. We also cannot achieve carbon neutrality without addressing those who have been disproportionately affected by all the harms of environmental justice over the last 200 years. So those two things are our greatest goals, and our greatest barriers are all the things that Jeremy stated. The fact that we engage in integrated resource planning here in Indianapolis, but also that there are systemic issues that exist that make it so that we aren't the only voice at the table, and trying to create social capital within those spaces, or use our cachet, or use our voice, or use our collective power within the Cities and Communities Coalition to make some further momentum toward our very similar goals throughout this region are what we are doing.
And something I should have mentioned is, so kind of there's a chicken or the egg thing, because MISO, and I didn't explain this very well, but so MISO is an independent, not-for-profit organization. They are staffed by just MISO staff members, but their members are transmission developers, utilities, they're environmental sector people. We're not official members, we just provide feedback, though maybe someday. So there's this complicated situation where MISO is impacting the decisions of the utilities and the transmission developers, but they also impact MISO because they are part of the process, and they have a huge, I don't want to say outweighted like it's negative, but they are the main members of MISO. So I don't want to necessarily paint this picture that, you know, it's one way, because it's kind of all interrelated.
I'll add that within Indianapolis, there's a suburb of Indianapolis called Carmel. And if you ever watched the show Parks and Recreation, Eagleton is based on Carmel. There's even a really funny Twitter account that's called Carmel is Eagleton. So I suggest you reach out or check that out if you'd like to. But MISO's Midwest subsidiary is located in Carmel, and do with that what you will.
And just to kind of take it back a little bit for folks too, and if this topic is new to you, a little quick history on the transmission system. Built far back as 1888. Through 1939 is when the original transmission grid system was built out, and all the large centralized generators that supply energy to that system went through a little bit of a, I guess you could call it a rehab in the 1960s, 70s, but it's pretty much been the same machine, the same system over the last century, a little bit longer. So we've got an antiquated system that has a lot of opportunity for reworking that system, redesigning that system, rethinking that system, introducing new technologies, introducing new materials that can perform better than the legacy materials that we've used to construct that system. And so that's a component of this too, and of our participation in MISO CCC is making sure that MISO's thinking about all of those other related opportunities, grid enhancing technologies, and incorporating DERs where it makes sense, or better valuing some of those DER resources like energy efficiency, and making sure that that plays a role. Distributed energy resources, so like your solar panels, energy efficiency is considered one as well, and demand management, so load shifting or load shedding. So if you have controls in a building and you turn down the lights at a certain time of the day when these air conditioners are hopping on, those can be like automated messages that happen between the utility and smart building that reduces the energy load across the utility territory so that they don't have to turn on their peak plants or turn them up as much when there's large load on the grid.
The only way to understand this stuff is to ask questions constantly. My boss is an engineer who's been doing this stuff for a very long time, and he loses me pretty much every day. So if there's anything, you know, if we kind of started off this presentation just fully just getting into how the grid functions, I would probably lose all of you. So what I hope everyone really takes away from this conversation is just that in order to meet clean energy goals, in order to turn to a majority renewable system, we have to think beyond generation. We have to understand how the transmission system works, what's needed. We have to understand who the regulators are, who's involved, because it's a very big machine. And we just have to start being smarter energy users, energy buyers, and smarter in just how we engage with energy. And that's really what the goal of this group is. I'm just gonna ask one more question, which is, what do you envision the future role of communities to be at MISO and in the energy sector in general?
That's a great question, and it's one I think that we debate all the time within the 4 people in the city of Indianapolis Office of Sustainability. Where do we have capacity to be engaging on this topic? If you are a team of 1 within your organization, how would you have the capacity to engage on this topic? And I think our pure participation is our future in it, in that we rely on, frankly, organizations like Great Plains Institute and World Resources to kind of break this down for us, and where we are able to create some internal channels within the city enterprise to say, yes, we're affixing our name to this public comment. yes, we're continuing to assert our clean energy goals, our carbon neutrality goals, our environmental justice goals align with this. And adding one more city to the list of those that are interested in engaging on this topic or interested in, again, our collective power to speak to MISO, to speak to our utilities, to speak to FERC, to speak to the EPA. That is our future. And I don't know where it's going. A lot of times I'd say that sustainability is the thing we're making up as we go along because nobody's ever done this before. The world is changing all the time and we're trying to figure it out as we go along.
And I would say participating in MISO has been really important for our community because when we look at a lot of the recent studies that MISO has done, a lot of planning and modeling that MISO has done, most of that is based on utility and state clean energy goals, which often lag behind clean energy goals. So those goals aren't incorporated into the planning processes as thoroughly as they should be. So participating in this group gives us a voice in that process, allows us to access the technical expertise of the Great Plains Institute, WRI, our other partner, to help us understand it better, to wrap our heads around it, see where those connections are. We really need to think at scales with sustainability from the local level all the way up to national. For us on the energy side, definitely the grid scale, and over MISO is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. There's a lot happening there, so looking at opportunities to participate and engage at that level. You can send some comments into the or the EPA previously as well. And FERC actually issued Order 2022, which is directive to better enable distributed energy resources to participate in energy. So there's top-down pressure on the RTOs, the regional transmission organizations like MISO, to start better integrating distributed energy resources and grid technologies into the systems that they're designing, they're building.
But even when MISO is doing that work, it's still very important that we're part of the conversation. We're engaging with this issue now, and you would be surprised just how much variability there is in how you model something. What you're using what your timelines are. There's a lot of, just because MISO does something about distributed energy resources doesn't mean it's truly meaningful unless people like us are engaged, the environmental sector is engaged. And so, yeah, I just wanted to kind of speak to Jeremy's point there that it's more than just MISO, you should pay attention to this stuff and walk away. It's continuous engagement in the process because the transmission developers are engaged, the utilities are engaged, and it's important that we are too.
Yeah, and a real example of some of the work we're doing through this group right now, MISO just submitted their capacity accreditation plan for consideration. And that is the plan that sets specific values for different types of generation assets, the capacity that they provide. So how much is energy supplied by natural gas plant worth? How much is energy supplied by wind turbine worth? How much is solar worth, et cetera, et cetera. And it has about 8 different resources that it looks at. And it has storage incorporated to that too. And how MISO is valuing those resources is critically important to our ability to advocate for more of those to be constructed on the grid. They can't be appropriately and fairly valued against one another. That's going to impact what we can see. We have a legacy grid, future grid that's better prepared to move energy all around, adapt, and be resilient to climate change. We're all facing and that we're all seeing the intensifying impacts on utility systems. So there are a lot of new technologies that allow the system to adapt to that too. And so pushing for more of those things, like reconductoring, which is basically the wires that you see strung between transmission lines. Legacy designs, and there are new metals and new ways of wrapping those wires that can move more energy through those wires and make that system more efficient, much more affordable upgrade. Utilities, especially investor-owned utilities right now, make most of their money off of capital investment, construction projects, power plants, things like that. So what we can do to influence MISO and the system to retool how we value those things within the system. Transition our communities to clean energy. Yeah.
Thank you. We're gonna turn it over to Wendy and then we'll come back for Q&A.
Morning. Morning. Thank you for being here. You're here, you're doing good work, and so I thank you for that. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm Wendy Breadholz. I'm the Senior Manager for the National Audubon Society's Transmission Initiative, working in MISO, in the northern part of MISO. There will be a little bit of redundancy in my presentation from Bridget's. However, I think that's probably fine, especially since folks have come and gone and this might be new to you, and I don't think it will be over the top. I came to Audubon in October from the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign in Indiana and Kentucky, where I worked for the previous 8 years. And if you're working on the clean energy transition, you know that there are a lot of barriers to moving away from fossil fuels. But one of them that really emerged in our work, working in Indiana, was transmission and the interconnection queue issues that Bridget highlighted. So I'm very proud to be doing this work on behalf of Audubon. And their transmission initiative, which last August, we released a birds in transmission report. A fact sheet about that report is located in the Huba app. I think it's pronounced Huba. Currently, you can find that fact sheet there. You should be able to find the entire report there. Eventually, I've asked them to load that up, but if not, National Audubon Society Birds in Transmission is easily Googleable. And so that PDF will come right up. And there will be a lot of information dense slides that I'm going to show you, but don't panic. You can go to that report and read more about all of this and get more of the information in a more in-depth way that I'll be able to discuss it today. Plus, it was written by scientists and I'm not a scientist, so I'll do my best to convey the information that they compiled for that great report. It might surprise you that Audubon is getting into this space, but birds are impacted by climate change. It's an existential threat. We released a report in 2019, Survival by Degrees, that showed that 2/3 of bird species are at risk of extinction. But we do have the ability to bend the bird curve if we move to renewable energy. And that's why we're in this space, not only because climate change is a threat, but also because transmission infrastructure itself is a threat to birds, right? Birds can collide, their habitat can be disturbed and degraded by any sort of development. So we're doing this work both around renewable energy and around transmission. And we need a lot in order to be able to get the clean energy that we need on the grid. We need to double or triple current transmission capacity to achieve our climate goals. It's a lot and a lot of work to do. I read an article recently, you may have seen, that said that we need to build enough transmission across the country from LA to New York and back 15 times in order to get all the clean energy that we need on the grid. So it's a significant challenge. And Audubon has committed to working for the swift and responsible, that's key, deployment of clean energy and transmission, 100 gigawatts in the next 5 years. That's enough to power 75 million homes. Bridget showed you a slide that looked something like this, that just sort of discusses the electric grid ecosystem from generation to transmission to distribution. And Jeremy spoke about sort of our ancient transmission system. And you can kind of think of it as this interstate highway for clean energy. And much like our interstate system, it was built over the last 100 years for a totally different types of capacity and generation. And so that's why we need to improve it. And as we move away from fossil fuels and electrify everything, as we decarbonize, we find ourselves at a crisis point when it comes to our readiness to get that clean energy that we need onto the grid. Bridget also mentioned the interconnection queue and the fact that there are 2,000 gigawatts of clean energy projects waiting in these lines, and that's more than exists on the current grid today. And this is clean energy that we really need to get online in order to meet our climate goals. And so, most of those projects are stuck in the queues for up to 5 years, and many of them are canceled and never built, and we just can't afford to be losing these clean energy projects in this way. Last fall, the Department of Energy conducted a national transmission needs study, and it found a pressing need for additional transmission across the country. And this map is in our report if you'd like to look at it later, but the white dots on this map represent the entire existing transmission grid. Again, it's taken us 100 years to build all those white dots. And the yellow dots are what is estimated we need to build in the next 12 to reach 95% clean electricity by 2035. And if we don't get that transmission in line, there's a Harvard study, I believe, that said that we can lose up to 80% of the carbon reduction potential in the Inflation Reduction Act. And as you know, the Inflation Reduction Act offers us our best chance for national climate action. And we really need to make sure that that renewable energy is able to be built. So it currently takes about 10 to 15 years to plan, permit, and build a new transmission project. We have a lot to build, and we have to do it faster and also better than we have historically. The difference between distribution and transmission, I think you might have by this point, but there are different risks to birds depending on the type of bird and the type of line. The primary issues with transmission lines are collision and habitat degradation and destruction, as I mentioned. And I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly, but there are certain bird characteristics that make them more vulnerable to collision. And then there are others that make it more of an issue with their habitat. And the high priority species for collision impacts, an example is the sandhill crane. They can't see the lines all that well, and they're big and flappy. And so they have a lot of area, right, to hit those lines, unfortunately. So they're a high vulnerability species for collision. And then the greater sage grouse is an example of a bird that's at a high vulnerability for habitat disturbance. And so when we're sitting down with developers and we're looking at these routes, we're looking at the birds that are in the areas and which are most vulnerable to either of the two by species. I'm just going to quickly show you how we've identified high priority areas for our engagement in the birds and transmission report. It's a lot of maps and a lot of data, and it's all in the report. we're just gonna go through it fairly quickly. We looked at our climate strongholds, which are areas in the country that are important to birds now and in the future. And then this full annual cycle prioritization is what places are needed most for birds as they're migrating across the hemisphere. Took those two maps, combine them into that integrated bird prioritization there in the middle, and then looked at existing and future planned transmission, right? Put all that together and we're able to create maps that show us where we're more likely to get issues with collision and habitat degradation and disturbance across the country. Here's what that looks like for collision. And here's what that looks like for habitat degradation and disturbance. And again, all of this is in the report. I know I'm moving through it fairly fast. And so what we're doing is sitting down with the developers to discuss bird-friendly solutions. What we're finding in terms of the birds in the area, where the routes are going through, if there are important bird areas, other places important to birds, you know, anything that's near a wetland is going to be an issue. We can look and see what birds have been seen where, and we can talk to the developers about what they're doing to mitigate our concerns about the birds in the area, whether it's in route planning or design. And there are things that you can do to try to make it less impactful for birds in those areas. And an example of how we've worked with a developer is the Sunzia transmission project in the Southwest. It broke ground in September. It took 17 years to permit and break ground for this project. And it's going to bring wind energy from New Mexico to Arizona and California. So over the last 5, we've worked with Pattern Energy, which was the developer that took over the project, and the Fish and Wildlife Service, providing our expertise and prioritizing 3 species, including the sandhill crane, which we mentioned, which is at high risk of collision and regularly travels through New Mexico and along the Rio Grande. So we worked with them to have them co-locate the transmission lines, which is one thing they can do to protect birds. And also they're experimenting with the technology that was successful at our Roe Sanctuary in Nebraska with ultraviolet light technology that allows the birds to see the lights better. And at the Roe Sanctuary, that reduced collision impacts by 89%. I mean, that's fairly significant. So hopefully that is something that will work out there as well. But this allowed Audubon to support a transmission project that's going to bring, it's the largest wind project in the Western Hemisphere. It's going to bring 3.5 gigawatts of renewable energy onto the Western grid, and it will do so by reducing impacts to bird life. This is just sort of enumerating our transmission policy priorities, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on that first one, maximizing the effectiveness of the existing grid. Jeremy talked a lot about how you can do this with things like reconductoring, grid enhancing technologies. Even distributed energy is part of maximizing the effectiveness of the existing grid. And that's the most bird friendly way to do it, is to squeeze the most capacity out of the grid that we have. There are statistics that say that we could, have the amount of transmission potentially that we have to build, maybe even less. I just don't think that other creative ways of dealing with our transmission challenges should be left on the table in the way that sometimes energy efficiency gets left on the table, or things that aren't as profitable for developers. So I really think that this is something that we should look at advocating for. It's more creative ways to get more energy out of the grid that we have with different metals and wires, etc. I'm very excited about that aspect of our policy work. And as I mentioned, I'm focused on MISO, and thanks to a lot of advocacy by groups, including Great Plains Institute, who really pushed for more transmission in MISO, They are doing this long-range transmission planning process right now. They've divided their projects into 4 groups they call tranches. I don't know why everybody in this world has to use words that aren't familiar to people, but this is tranche 1, generally. These are the lines that we're actively engaging with developers and our members right now to try to support. There will be additional ones. They recently released a draft of the second tranche or group of projects. The tranche now, so all of these, most of these, it says 80%, most of these lines are on existing rights of way. So these will be the relatively easier projects to get built because they won't be going through so-called greenfields to be built. It's that second tranche that will be more greenfields. And of course, that will be more challenging, acquiring the land, you know, that kind of thing can really make these processes more lengthy and more contentious. And so we're sort of using this opportunity to build the relationships with the developers now in this tranche 1. It will be a little easier, sitting down with them and talking about, you know, what we see in terms of how these are developed with the least impact on birds. You know, lesser impact on birds is going to be lesser impact on other types of wildlife, on the landscape. And obviously, we're also valuing communities and our members and what they're concerned about where these lines are being developed. I don't have to think, I mean, Bridget did a great job of telling you who MISO is and how it works. So thank you for that, Bridget, preceding me there. But yeah, so I hope that you come away from all of this understanding just how important it is that we get all this transmission built. We titled the session, No Transition Without Transmission. When you hear about these projects coming through your communities, I hope that that will help you sort of be able to communicate the benefits and support them if you can. It's just really important. We have so much clean energy that we need to build, and we have to do it faster than we've ever done it before, and we have to do it better than we've ever done it before. So yeah, I guess that's all I've got. So thank you so much for your attention.
I assume there are no questions.
Yeah, you want to get started?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for this. I am a fellow energy nerd, so it was great to just see this transmitted in plain language. Thank you in the one of the things that we talked about, and going back and forth between this, we talked a lot about distributed energy resources. That's near and dear to me because I'm pushing up a non-wire settlement actually in Michigan. I was wondering, you know, kind of 2 things. What do you guys have any ideas about, or could you explain to everybody here a little bit more about, you know, solutions like vehicle to grid and virtual power plants and how that can actually be used beneficially for demand response? Because that is something like we've been trying to investigate in Michigan, but not super successfully. In fact, it kind of hurts me that Ford did a vehicle to grid pilot in the Carolinas, you know, being from Southeast Michigan. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting that could potentially be a solution, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about, is you know, that utilities make a lot of their income based on assets. You know that a lot of those assets, like gas power plants, they're going to be stranded. They're never really going to, you know, meet their ROI. What are your thoughts on performance-based standards, utilities? In Southeast Michigan, we have some of the most expensive electric and the worst reliability.
Yeah.
I tried to be as loud as I could.
Of course.
Did folks hear that question back there? Okay, great. So the first item, grid, connected buildings. and
Yeah.
Transportation, we certainly can kind of touch on that one. I believe those types of DERs are a critical piece that can reduce the amount of new transmission that needs to be built to accommodate our clean energy transition. And it's something we're starting to think about as a community, basically envisioning our buildings, our fleet vehicles, our buses and our bus system as which we can store energy to utilize during periods of high demand so that our utility doesn't have to call up their peaker plants and turn those on to generate energy when everybody turns on their AC at 5 o'clock at night. And so we have a brand new lead, going to be lead silver or gold certified here soon, public works facility, and it has significant amount of indoor parking for fleet vehicles for public works, and we find that building thinking about potential future integration with building integration with the electric vehicles and how could we use those areas to serve the building. And so we've added a lot of additional conduit throughout that garage to accommodate electrification of the fleet in the future and thinking about having additional space for systems or other upgrades that we need to make in order to shift that building over to be able to do some directional energy exchange. So we thought about that a little bit with that facility. It's still very early in the process. But I think those are two critically important technologies that we. Second question. Anybody have a response to that one?
Can you remind me?
Yeah, there was a part where it was discussed that utilities make a significant amount of their income based on their assets, right? Based on power, based on the construction of those. Do you guys have any thoughts about shifting or proposing a performance-based standard? Making them a little bit more accountable for what they're putting out and making it so they don't have to be building assets to make money, and they could make money based on, performance, the way that most Fortune 500 companies do make based on
Little something.
On the way up here, I was listening to the Volts podcast, David Roberts, I think it was the latest, I think it was the one about the grid transformation, but I was thinking about the way in which it is such a challenge that the way that these utilities make their money, it's such a challenge to, the fact that they earn a return on investment for putting steel in the ground can be a problem. It incentivizes them sometimes in the wrong direction. And they were talking about how, it's not the utilities are bad, it's that they're incentivized in the wrong way or they're conservative. And it occurred to me also, they're often monopolies, and that doesn't encourage them to be creative and look at all these, interesting and new solutions as well. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I do know that that's a problem. That's the way in which that they're incentivized to develop. And that will also encourage them just to build a heck of a lot more poles and wires rather than looking at the more creative solutions as well. Just as they might be more likely to build a great big gas plant than to be any interested in supporting community solar.
So in Indianapolis and in other communities, when we have integrated resource planning opportunities, and if folks are new to that term, it's when your utility essentially says, here's all of the things we have planned for the next 3 years. Here's our grid mix for the next 3 years. And then cities, stakeholders get the opportunity to comment on that, engage on that topic, offer where their goals align or don't align with whatever that projected mix is or whatever those plans are. So with the city, we have taken similar positions in IRP engagement. Those opportunities don't come up very often. So it's trying to go to the next resource. It's like going to one parent and then saying, you don't get that answer, so you go to another parent. So that's where we're trying to engage in federal funding opportunities around renewable resources to try to create our own, do some community solar, work on rooftop solar, try to just use less of the utility grid.
And haven't spent much time thinking about the space. I agree that we need to shift away from the existing system funding and financing for utility projects. It's definitely not productive to accelerating deployment of energy sources and undervalued. We don't have an IRP process in Iowa, so we don't get that opportunity to weigh in. So that's where getting a seat at the table here is critical.
Onto that real quick.
Yeah.
As a fellow,
The microphone?
no, I'll be louder. Thank you. I'm also from Southeast Michigan. I live in Ann Arbor. And Ann Arbor is trying to take it a step further and purchase the entire grid and utility, basically the local utility, because DTE is crap in Southeast Michigan. We pay the highest and get the worst. Very true. But that's an apex goal for communities in some respects, and a lot of communities don't want to have to deal with all that. Can you talk about what that might look like in terms of integrating? I don't see that as a major solution because a lot of communities don't have that kind of equity, that kind of buy-in. What that might look like to be able to buy and where they would fit into plans as you're going. Is that a model we should be looking more towards local ownership?
Well,
Why not?
we might be able to turn to some of our university system models where they're contracting for their central power plant operation to external entities in cities. So the 8-0 plan for Ann Arbor and sustainable energy utility model is very attractive and something that we're watching and following to see how that whole process develops. But that's something we wouldn't have the capacity in-house to manage our own utility quotation marks and staff up to be able to do that. But if we were able to pull together a bunch of resources in our community and sort of a virtual single power plant, that may be an option, and then contracting with some partners that might be able to provide the service of managing that virtual power plant and then having that tie it back into the grid. Demand for our utility. Area or space.
Can I just,
A PPA or BPPA?
Uh,
We talked about that topic. Described it.
Yeah, so a power purchase agreement is a agreement between entity that wants to purchase clean energy, a developer that wants to provide that energy. Typically, it is a 10 to 15, sometimes 20-year agreement. Often works better at scale, so you get a better value for the clean energy. Used a lot for solar. Deployment of solar across, say, a bunch of municipal buildings. You partner with a developer. That developer owns and maintains that system for the duration of the PPA contract, and you buy the energy. So you basically have like a guaranteed energy price for the next, however long that contract is. And then there's typically a point or two at which you can have that. So at an appreciated value. That's an example of that. And then a virtual one, kind of that.
I want to just push back on this because it seems like what Bridget was telling us initially is, we're all part of the same Midwest grid. And the idea that any of our communities, and so I'm from Dane County, Madison, Wisconsin, another place where we might have the wherewithal to go, we can do this And maybe we can even spend so much money that we can, like, I don't know, disconnect from the grid is still the grid around us. Unless we're becoming completely autonomous, unless we're becoming Texas and not playing with anyone else, the grid, the MISO is still a problem and it's still like, so I think, and we're leaving behind all of the communities that cannot do this on their own. I think there's an important point here about what we can do collectively to the whole versus, but I get that our constituents would like us to be a perfect island amid the purple of Wisconsin, but that isn't real life.
And from a resilience perspective, you know, microgrids and the ability to disconnect are really great for resilience, but also being connected is really great for resilience, because just as you said, we don't want to be Texas. Because, you know, Winter Storm Uri, that was the freeze that was in 2021. ERCOT, which is Texas's single state RTO, so their single state version of MISO. They have very limited transmission connections to other regions. 240 something people died. There were the same storm hit the MISO territory, but we did not have that impact because we were able to pull from our neighbors who were not experiencing the same weather that we were. So to Kathy's point, there's local action, which is very important, and there is regional and national action. And apparently Jeremy's already on international action, 2 steps ahead of me.
We do have a northern neighbor in the United States and a southern neighbor, which we could be connected to or better connected to.
That's right.
Northern neighbors technically our southern neighbor in Detroit.
Yes. I'm Delaney. I work with energy and climate policy in Indiana and familiar with MISO as well. And I kind of want to tie in maybe more to the conversation on environmental justice. So looking at MISO's projected installed capacity and committed capacity by 2022, you guys are pushing towards over 50% renewables. But what we see in Indiana is this all of shifting on us to do coal, natural gas, carbon capture. So our communities are still getting air pollution, the water pollution from all of that, and other Midwestern states are transitioning and benefiting from renewable energy. And what we're stuck with is people's carbon capture emissions and supercritical fluid, abandoned coal mines, energy communities in Indiana, and Indiana has its own challenges. But unfortunately, in the State House, it seems like MISO shows up and is not being transparent about that all of the above, that renewables can work. And in the event of the winter storm in 2022, the transmission lines failed, natural gas was unreliable. And what was not stressed was that renewables did perform as expected. But instead, the conversation shifted towards maybe we should keep coal open longer because I guess natural gas is not reliable anymore. So how is MISO showing up specifically in the states where coal and fossil fuels are heavy, so that maybe we make the pie bigger instead of everybody just gets a small piece of the pie?
Bridget, I'm gonna start there just to talk about the local aspect of it. So thanks for the question or the statement. That's gonna lead me to an additional statement. The opportunity that I see most, specifically speaking about the scenario that you described, is that continuing to push for a greater evaluation of renewable energies, where these RTOs literally assign a value to various energy productions, and they don't all have the same value because capitalism and structures that already exist and various motivations to continue to do the same thing. And that's part of the position that MISO CCC takes, is pushing for a higher renewable energy valuation, literally to give it more value. So that's one of our positions.
And so are you speaking to just the fact that we are in this larger connected region? There are states that have these clean energy goals and there are states that don't. And MISO says we have to have a certain amount of firm resources on the grid, natural gas, coal, whatever it is. Though coal is, from my perspective, coal has been not that strongly valued in the recent resource accreditation process. It doesn't seem, natural gas is what the conversation is surrounding it. So you're basically speaking to this idea that some states are they're gonna have to maintain those plants and some states won't have to. Is that kind of towards your point or not exactly?
Yeah, that some states are gonna bear the brunt of all of the above approach. Instead of some of these creative solutions, battery storage as well to make renewables stronger. I mean, I think utility scale storage is now up to like 2 to 8 hours to bridge that gap. But the conversation that so is having, at least in Indiana, I don't looks like what it is in other states. So
You're also talking about the equity of the
yeah,
adjacent communities that live next to these
Too.
coal plants, that live next to these gas plants
or
and
nuclear. We're also doing
nuclear.
small modular nuclear reactors here as well. So
And that's a challenge we face in Iowa too, you know, American Energy and Energy have invested a lot in energy resources. Those are our two main investor-owned utilities in Iowa. But they still operate, American still operates 6 coal plants in Iowa and adjacent states along the Mississippi as well. And they make money off of the energy that they generate from those plants and sell out of state. And so they're not as motivated to shutter those plants as quickly. So that needs to be an important piece of the conversation, introducing these equity aspects, understanding the health impacts on those communities so that we can reinforce that in discussions with elected leaders at the local, at the state, at the federal level about ways that we can better protect the community. Federal government seemed all in on equity and Justice 40 and environmental justice and making sure that those benefits accrue to and point out the non-energy effects that the people face with toxicity, exposure, and various diseases, cancers. Result.
And just really quickly about coal in Indiana. I mean, coal in Indiana at this point is all about Duke Energy. So if you have members in Duke Energy territory, get them engaged in the IRP process that's happening. Everybody else is really moving past it.
And they're really, I just wanna just reiterate, there is a huge challenge with the fact that regional transmission organizations are multi-state, but each state has their different policies. This is, and so MISO's only goal is to maintain a reliable energy system. They are, as they like to say constantly, resource agnostic. That's all I'll say on that. But they truly, all that their mission is for reliability. The only reason that they're planning these transmission lines that are supposed to support clean energy is because they're looking at reliability challenges down the line. And they're seeing that utilities are setting these goals, states are setting these goals. Hopefully soon they'll include community goals into that, but they're seeing these goals and they're seeing their interconnection queues, having a huge backlog, and they have to do something. And on the East Coast, there's an RTO where a lot of states had carbon pricing. And that complicated their market because the way that the market functions, And the market is run second to second and day ahead. The way that the market functions is they call on all the generators in their region and they say, we need this much power. Everybody puts in their bids for how much they can supply and at what cost. All of those bids are stacked from the lowest cost to the highest. What do you think the lowest cost is? It's solar and wind, because there's no fuel costs. They cost almost nothing to produce. So, and then the way that it functions is they stack that all up. They say, okay, this lowest to this amount is what we need, and those people get paid. All of those people get paid for the highest bidder that made it into the market. I know this is a little confusing without a chart in front of me, but it's important to note that solar is not getting paid for solar's costs. They're getting paid for the gas plant. And the reason that market is the way it is because it kind of encourages everybody to produce at the least cost to make sure that you actually make it into the market. On the East Coast, where all of these states had carbon pricing, they then tried to make their market be fair for everybody because they don't represent that one state with the carbon price. They represent all the states. And so it really complicated everything. We don't exactly have that issue yet in the Midwest and South, but it's really important to note that how these state policies and what's happening at MISO and what's happening at the national level at FERC and what's happening at the state public utilities commissions, we have to be really careful how we're thinking about how all these things are going to play together. Yeah.
Love to talk about because there's a bias that favors baseload generation. I think that a future visioning project where we all get together and be more creative, come up with a more honest reflection of the power of renewables, especially hybrid systems. But I don't want to completely do this, so it's interesting. Do you want to, if there's time, touch upon some I'll raise, which is the concerns around permitting? Because we cannot keep going with 15, 17-year permitting processes. It came up at another conference I was at recently that these transmission projects are handled by dozens, changing hands even through projects. They're initiated by one company, owned by another, and run by a utility. And so in order to not cut corners in ways that would compromise state environmental security, what are some best practices you see in speeding up that process, such that we could advocate either at the state level or at the MISO level for a better permitting will actually get us where we go in less than a decade?
Yeah, thank you. I'll let Wendy kind of speak because really, I can't plug the Birds and Transmission report enough. It is a really great report on like a lot of different siting opportunities. And one thing that Audubon actually works, a project that I work on and that Audubon is a member of is Next Gen Highways, which is a project to site transmission in the highway rights of way, where safe and appropriate, because you deal with one landowner, the Department of Transportation, and that land has already been cut through, versus being on hundreds of private landowners' land or through conservation area land. So that's one opportunity, is siting on land that is owned by one person, on utilizing our existing corridors and rights of way.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned in our presentation also that that's most bird-friendly way is going on an existing rights of way, so that's something we're advocating for as part of Next Gens. And in this first set or tranche of projects, so many of them are already on that existing right of way. So I may call in my colleague Adam Ford, see if he has anything additional to say. Policy Director in Great Lakes Audubon.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, I will grab the microphone then. For us, I'm our policy director with Audubon, focusing on renewable transmission, our climate policy portfolio. For us, historically, again, painting with broad brushstrokes, historically, environmental groups have been a little bit late to the permitting party, to the routing parts. So oftentimes what happens is a developer gets the process, secures land rights, gets rights of way, environmental group comes along. Understandably, they're resource constrained, they're capacity constrained. We all are resource and capacity constrained. And they say, hey, we have a problem with this project. The developer is 80% of the way on the project. Now that's a huge investment. Now there are fewer opportunities to be able to address those environmental concerns, to get the climate benefits from the transmission project while avoiding wildlife costs, usually birds, but we also have some other wildlife impacts that we see. What we're trying to do is be proactive, and thanks to Wendy, thanks to our virgin transmission report, we can now go to the developers and say, as you're planning your guides, let's work with you from the start. Let's look at, are we crossing bodies of water? Are we going near sensitive habitat? We can select routes based on our initial impacts that are going to reduce those impacts, allow the developer to build these lines more quickly. And what you'll see is fewer of these lines. There's a line, I don't need to get into it, in Wisconsin that did not go through that process, that has some environmental concerns. That line has been continued to be held up by litigation and lawsuits, not commenting on the merits of those, but that's not the process we want to see for a rapid build out of effectively sited transmission. So being proactive, finding opportunities in order to manage those lines, whether it's diverters, whether it's some of the light technologies that we've seen. These are the things that we're able to do to be able to not have zero impacts. We realize that built environment is going to have impacts. We can't get around those. What we're concerned about is population level impacts, threatened species. And I think that streamlining permitting so that we still maintain the effectiveness of our permitting, whether it's NEPA, whether it's the Endangered Species Act, we still maintain those critical elements without having unnecessary delays that come along. So it's tough to talk about a holistic change while only picking one piece here and ignoring another piece. Holistic change is very difficult. What we really need to do is prioritize maintaining those protections for environmental impacts, allowing transmission to move. And our little part of that is just being proactive and trying to work with developers individually so that we can see some of these early projects move forward, build that muscle memory. So that is when you mentioned earlier, when we're not building on existing rights of way, when we're building through greenfields, that we have done that before. We've built a relationship with those developers, and we're able to, again, select those least impactful routes while still getting them.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. He's been leading our national work on this and has been at it a bit longer than I have. But I think that another thing is like the whole point of the Virgin Transmission Report also is to speed up, because our members are actually very likely opponents, right? They're about conserving natural areas, and so talking to them about the benefits of the program and making sure that they understand that we're representing birds and ensuring that we can to reduce impacts on them.
There's also a double benefit of putting new generation on old generation sites. There's the siting, and then there's also that will help in the interconnection queue so that it gets approved quicker. So that's just another. Yeah, I think we have time for just one more, but go ahead.
I'm new to the whole MISO thing, and I'm just like, so I have a couple questions. One is, MISO have the ability to sort of set those standards in you, or, you know, if all the members are these utility companies and things like that. MISO's are they guiding those utility companies and thinking about those development projects?
So MISO can only plan the transmission projects. They do not have a role in the actual siting. With that said, when MISO is planning these long-range transmission planning projects that we talked about, the first tranche, which Wendy mentioned, are mainly on existing rights of way. And the reason they did that is because they thought they would get approved faster. There's only so much existing transmission right of way. MISO does really depend on the states and their regions to pass things like this project that we're working on, Next Gen Highways, or other siting solutions. Yeah.
And just my follow-up to that was thinking about the people aspect, and completely agree, if we can use what already exists, great. But you know, new lines are being made because they have to be, and they're going through private landowners and farms. And sometimes that has not always been either a transparent process or suddenly get a notice in the mail that says tomorrow we're having open discussion at the town hall about this new power line that's coming through. And this is the first time I'm hearing about it. So I'm curious if there is a better process, what kind of outreach is going on either to private landowners or community members when these really cool, like, want to support it, but also like, you're gonna put what in the middle of my farm?
Right.
Bro, what?
And we're seeing right now a lot of legislation in Midwestern states about eminent domain for carbon
Yeah.
capture pipelines, right? That's limiting the ability of those companies run carbon pipeline where they so an issue where you get kind of torn because you can understand the landowners' concerns about their land, but also understand you need these big systems of technologies get us to where we need to go in the future. So we are kind of at a catch-22 right now in policy, figuring out how to navigate through that. What's happening with the carbon pipelines, also transfer to transmission.
I just think about outreach to communities beforehand and how can companies or organizers set the stage for those communities and those people better, so it moves those, there's less blockages or somebody suing for whatever reason.
Right, and
In transition benefit
Yeah.
projects to those.
Get buy-in and more support to maybe move things along better.
And there is a lot of movement on that from organizer and nonprofit communities. So Audubon and Great Plains Institute is part of this huge effort to really educate people on these MISO lines that are coming and try to do that work early and try to get the messaging out and just also be really aware of what the developer is doing and where they are at in the process before it gets posted online or something. So some of that work is getting done and trying, also Great Plains Institute, which I don't work on this, but there's efforts to find those storytellers in communities and to find people early before a line even comes, so people can be engaged really early on in this work. Sorry, Lindsay, did you want to add something?
I just do one. I'm from Audubon also. You get like the Audubon contingent. I just want to plug. That's another space I think. And it prevents a lot of what you were talking about because you're talking about highway right of ways, but it's not always happening or being allowed. So sort of clearing the way at the state level, that being an option helps all of these pieces.
Thank you. No, thank you. And we're out of time here, but thank you all so much for your questions, and I'm around all day. Everybody's here. You can come and ask us anything.